Welcome back. Today let's talk about handgun hunting. You know, I've had a great interest in handguns as far back as I can remember, really. I was a young teenager when my dad first got me a Ruger Mark I with a bull barrel, and I started shooting with him down at the local gun club. That's where I really had my first fascination with handguns, and it's continued throughout my life. It was my professional endeavor to teach others what I knew about handguns, and my goal was always to teach the other guy. I was, there's some people who were the doers, and there are other people who are the coaches. And my goal throughout my life, my calling was to be a coach. It was very satisfying to, put trophies up on the bookshelf and things like that. And that satisfied my ego and my interest at the time. But then when I was called upon to start teaching people to shoot, I found that I still had that love for competitive shooting, but far better than that for me was to teach other people to do what I could do. So that basically there was a multiplication of my skill. I was not only a NRA Distinguished Expert with a revolver and with a pistol, but I was able to teach many other people to be distinguished experts and sharpshooters and things like that. And I could teach people to come home at the end of the day alive, because of the skill that I was able to pass on to them, so that they would be professionals in their craft. So that's what I'm always seeking to do with my audience. It's not so much about my shooting anymore. It's about teaching other people what I know so that it doesn't pass away with me someday. Because we're all going that route, whether you think about it or not. So that's why we need to always be up to date on our salvific level of life, not just on the daily level. Now, handgun hunting can be as simple as getting yourself a 22. You can get a revolver or a auto pistol. Both of them will accomplish essentially the same thing. In all cases, I always recommend that for a hunting pistol, you keep the barrel length as long as practical. This one happens to be a 6 3/4 inch barrel. This is an older Ruger Mark II, very, very accurate. And I've taken it afield with me many times to go plinking and squirrel hunting and things like that. It's probably shot more pine cones and things that my dog chases around than anything else. But they're very, very competent and capable for squirrels and things of that sort. I really wouldn't press them into service for anything larger than gray squirrels. My first encounter with my Ruger Mark I with the 5-inch bull barrel, I shot a woodchuck repeatedly 5 times with 22 long rifle hollow points, high-speed hollow points, and every time the woodchuck was struck, I could see his body movement where I struck the woodchuck, and he just kept running until he finally expired at the top of his hole with five shots in him. It was not what I would categorize as a very, very humane or spectacular kill by any means. I had to basically go up to the hole, and I had to give him the coup de grace in the head in order to finish him off, because there's just not enough velocity and remaining power in a handgun. When you're dealing with handgun velocities, and this is applicable to all handguns of all calibers. When you're dealing with handguns, you're dealing with reduced velocities. The barrel length is what controls your velocity. The longer the barrel that you have, the more burning time that you have for the powder, and the higher the velocity. And conversely, as you reduce the barrel length, you reduce the velocity. at its highest levels, handgun velocities are low, comparatively speaking. They're, compared to a rifle, handgun velocities are very, very meager. So the essential problem that you have with the 22 long rifle is that high-speed ammunition simply develops nothing more than standard velocities out of a handgun. Regardless of what it says on the box, you just simply don't have enough barrel length in order to achieve supersonic velocity. So your velocity levels are at standard speeds. I would still recommend nothing less than hollow points for a handgun, simply because the hollow point is the very least that you can do to upset the bullet a little bit and to maximize the striking energy. Now, the 22 is also adequate for rabbits, cottontail rabbits and varying hares, things like that within reasonable range. But again, it doesn't have much. It doesn't have much hitting power, and it's got very, very low. It's got very low bullet diameter. So between having no particular velocity involved and no particular bullet diameter, you're working at the very, very bottom of the scale. So you always have to keep things real and make sure that you are working sensibly with a handgun. But that's a lot of fun gun to have. A good 22 handgun to go plinking in the woods and shooting squirrels, and maybe if you can get a shot at a cottontail rabbit or something like that, a coney rabbit. It's a decent enough gun for that, and it's also a terrific gun to just get some good solid practice in. If you're moving up the ladder in terms of varmint hunting, you can move kind of into an area which is really, they're almost sub-rifles, you might say. You get into the 14-inch barrels with the contenders, the Thompson Center contenders and things like that. These are miniature rifles with a handgun grip on them. You're dealing with a 14-inch barrel, which is only 2 inches shorter than standard rifle barrel. I should say a legal rifle barrel, and for that matter, a lot of AR-15s that have a welded-on flash hider don't have much more than a 14.5-inch barrel when all is said and done. So, that's what you're dealing with. So you can pretty much take shots with such calibers that are chambered in those guns, like 221 fireballs and 223s. That's good varmint medicine as far out as you want to try your hand. And there's no loss if you should miss, because those cartridges are either gonna cause that animal to stop where he is, or you're gonna miss him. But those are good, formidable varmint cartridges in a handgun for that sort of shooting. I won't talk about the heavier calibers for the moment, but I'll go back to woodland varmint shooting. If you want to have a good all-around cartridge, there's nothing that I think is any better than a 38 Special. Now, whether you purchase it in a 357 Magnum handgun or not, but the 38 Special cartridge is a terrific all-around woodland varmint cartridge. I mean, you can shoot rabbits with it. You can shoot foxes. You can shoot virtually woodchucks. Anything you want to shoot with a 38 Special in that weight category is going to go down pretty quickly and pretty authoritatively. If you're interested in preserving pelts, and if you're interested in preserving meat, I wouldn't use hollow points. I would use simply either round nose. Cowboy loads are fine, but I'd use either round nose bullets, or I would use truncated cone Keith style bullets. Let's see if I have one here. These are typically known as semi-wad cutters. You can see there's a flat nose on it, and there's a sharp edge around the bottom of the cone. They make a good solid hit on game, and no matter what size, and they cut a nice hole, and they don't damage an awful lot of meat. Those bullets are typically not going to expand at 800 or 900 feet per second striking velocity. So they make a good small game load. And there's nothing more accurate than a 38 special, and there's nothing more fun to shoot than a 38 special. The last varmint that I shot happened to be a porcupine about 18 feet up into a tree, and I shot him with my little Ruger SR9C. This is a 9mm, and I was using 124 grain hollow points plus P hollow points. The porcupine was a little bit stubborn in dying. I hit him with the first shot, and he kind of slumped, and he didn't fall out of the tree. He may have very well been dead for all I know, but he just kind of hung over the branch, and I hit him again from an angle, and he rolled off and he slid down the tree. So, but that's also a good cartridge in the 38 special velocity range. That's one situation, however, where many of your bullets many of your cartridge loadings for the 9mm tend to be higher velocity. They tend to be supersonic out of a handgun, 1,200 feet per second, and things like that. And with hollow points, meat destruction can be a little bit on the excessive side if you're looking to preserve something to eat at the table. One of the problems with a squirrel is there's not an awful lot of tissue there to eat anyway, and you don't want to be bloodshot in half of the animal with extremely high velocity. All you're really looking for is a good sized bullet or a 22 that hits him and strikes him in the head or something. But you don't need to have high velocity for any animals like that, and certainly for rabbits and things. Rabbits go down pretty quickly. So those are all the things. I don't want to give a treatise on hunting so much, because that's another thing. I'm presuming that you're going to learn about the game animals that you're going after, but I'm trying to school you about the appropriate bullet selection and cartridge selection for that. I would certainly go no lower than that cartridge category for any game whatsoever. The 380 is certainly not it's not a round that has any particular striking capacity beyond a few yards. It's going to have, you're always going to have a very small gun with a very small sighting plane at best, so they don't have the precision necessary in order to effect a very sure hit on very small animals, and they're certainly not something you should be going afield with to hunt with. There are smaller cartridge calibers. There's 32s that are rimmed cartridge cases that have very high velocity, and that's another story altogether. Those are very, very good for animals up to and including coyotes and stuff within their range. Let's talk about the more common handgun hunting that probably is most people in America are interested in, and that's deer hunting. Deer have been, for a great many years, long before the magnums came about, deer were taken with cartridges such as the 44 Special. That's probably one of the more common ones. The 45 Colt, things like that, and they did an adequate job. But let's go back and understand what we're dealing with when you're dealing with handguns. At their very, very highest level, and I'm accepting the monster calibers, the 500 Smith & Wesson and the 454 Casull and stuff like that. But at their very highest levels, handgun cartridges are delivering very low velocities. 1,400 feet per second out of a handgun is a stunning velocity, but it's not a very stunning velocity when compared to a rifle. Rifle cartridges that are typically used for hunting, even the lowly 30-30 is delivering a velocity of 2,200 to 2,300 feet per second at the muzzle with 170 grain bullets. So you got a lot of bullet length, a lot of sectional density, and you've got some pretty good muzzle velocity. There are no handguns that deliver that sort of muzzle velocity. They usually fall short by 8 or 900 feet per second compared to the 30-30 at the muzzle. And the 30-30 at the muzzle has got, with its 170 grain bullet, has got far superior sectional density than any handgun cartridge made. So when I'm talking about handgun cartridges, I'm not talking about rifle cartridges that are placed in a handgun like a Thompson Center Contender or something. That's a rifle cartridge with a foreshortened barrel. But handgun cartridges, let's take a look and see what we get for velocities and energies from the source. This is the Hornady reference material for their ammunition, and this is not all the ammunition that's available. They've limited their bullet selections to what they think are suitable for their lineup, and there are other companies that have different lineups. But when you're talking about, for instance, a 9mm Luger with the longest, heaviest bullet that's available for that, which is they have here 135 grain flex lock or 147 grain XTP. I would say that would be the minimum I would want to go hunting with, would be a 147 grain bullet. That's only delivering a velocity of 975 feet per second. And the energy figures to drive that bullet home, it's 310 foot-pounds of energy. Now, that doesn't stack up very well against rifle cartridges, deer rifle cartridges that are delivering more on the order of 1,000 foot-pounds of energy and things like that. If you take the lowly 30-30. 30-30 with a 160 grain bullet is exiting the muzzle at 2,400 feet per second and has a striking energy at 100 yards of 1,643 foot-pounds. Even at 300 yards, if you can hit your game at 300 yards, it's got 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. So you can see how the muzzle energy of a handgun cartridge is pretty silly compared to that. There's really nothing to compare. You say, well, what about the 44 Magnum? Well, let's go up the chart to the 44 Magnum with a 300 grain bullet. The muzzle velocity with a 7.5-inch vented barrel, in other words, a handgun barrel, is 1,150 feet per second. If you go to a 240 grain, classic 240 grain bullet, you're going down to 1,350 feet per second out of that 7.5-inch barrel. The velocity, at those velocities, the energy at 50 yards is 781 for the heavier bullet and 806 for the lighter bullet, for the 240 grain bullet. So you see, you're really not talking the same language when you're talking about handguns. You're greatly reducing the driving force behind that bullet to get it home. So how do handguns kill deer if they don't have that energy? And they do kill deer, and they don't have that energy. The reason they do it because, as I've said so many times, bullets don't kill with energy, they kill with tissue destruction. If this is why muzzle loaders back in colonial days brought home the game. They didn't have muzzle velocity, and they didn't develop great energy with a round ball. What they did was they caused great tissue destruction with a large bore. 78 caliber, 50-something caliber. They were always big bores, and they struck and they left a big massive hole, a lot of bleeding, and they damaged bones on the way through. So this is the other way that you can create killing power, is not so much not because you have high velocity, but because you have a lot of frontal area. In other words, a massive frontal area which causes a lot of tissue destruction on the way in. In combination with that, you have to maintain a level of velocity, but you also have to maintain a long bullet profile, what's called a long sectional density. So I'll give you two examples. Here's I wish they didn't extinct these things. Hornady, this is older 265 grain soft point. I think this is one of the finest this is one of the finest 44 Magnum bullets that was ever made, I think, but some reason or another they must have not sold enough or something, because they pulled it from their catalog line. But this bullet here, you can see, has a great long bullet shank, and that will get its way in deep. Here's a 240 grain bullet that's got a pretty good long profile too. It's lighter. It's not as heavy as this 265, but it has a pretty good bullet profile. But it has a cutting edge at the top, the truncated cone, and along the side. This is called variously a semi-wad cutter, classically known as the Keith style bullet, named after Elmer Keith, because he designed that. Both those bullet profiles, they're usable on large game like deer, because they're long and they'll go in deep and they'll penetrate and get a lot of work done. They'll upset a lot of tissue and cause a lot of tissue destruction. The tissue destruction we're talking about here is lung tissue. All right, we don't want to be, just destroying any tissue. It's lung tissue is what we're talking about here. Heart tissue is a very small thing to shoot at, and deer can run for hundreds of yards being shot through the heart. My dear friend years ago shot a beautiful doe, 150-pound doe, big doe, right through the heart with 180 grain 30-06. Shattered the heart completely with nothing but strings of tissue when he dressed out the deer. But that deer went through the entire cornfield, 300 yards long, before it ended up at the stone fence at the other end of the pasture. So, deer can run a long way with a heart shot. So you want to penetrate lungs as far as you can. Lungs succumb not only from tissue destruction, which is rather modest with a handgun bullet. A handgun bullet doesn't shatter the lung tissue like a high velocity rifle bullet does. Lungs are filled with a lot of fluid, a lot of blood and a lot of fluid. When they're struck with a high velocity bullet, they burst and they basically come apart at the seams, because it's the same type of thing as hitting a jug of water. There's a lot of fluid, and it just basically blows up. But a handgun bullet does not hit them that way. A handgun bullet hits them, and they basically have to penetrate through, and they leave a hole and they cause hemorrhaging. But the biggest factor of all is to be able to get out. If you can get it out the other side, it will cause the lungs to collapse, because the chest cavity, the thorax of the animal, will deflate when the atmosphere basically neutralizes it. The outside atmosphere pours into the thorax, and as military people know, you get a sucking chest wound. A sucking chest wound is a very bad thing to have. You got to stop it up real quick and get a piece of plastic over it or something to stop it from sucking. Otherwise, the person's lungs are going to collapse. But that's what happens with a bullet that goes all the way through. It basically opens up that thorax. The outside air neutralizes the chest cavity, and the lungs collapse, and that's what brings about the quicker halt for the animal. It gets him to stop in a hurry because he can't breathe anymore. So it's very essential to have a good size, a good length bullet that can penetrate all the way through. People have, often asked me about the issue of keeping the bullet into the handgun bullet in the interior of the game animal, because this falls to the old notion of energy dumping, is what it used to be called, and some people still refer to that factor. It's a mythological concept that was it's based on bad science. The concept is that energy dumping occurs when a bullet that's traveling along at 340 foot-pounds of energy strikes and stays in the body and delivers 340 foot-pounds of energy, and that by going through, it will drag some of that energy with it, which goes out the other side. Well, as I say, it's about disrupting the lungs and stopping, ceasing them from functioning. Getting air in the other side will effectively bring the lungs to a very painful cessation, because they're going to collapse. There's nothing more painful than collapsed lungs. Ask anybody who's ever had that happen to them if they've ever had a lung collapse. It's extremely painful. I've known people who've had that happen for one reason or another. It's extremely painful. You're going to stop people. The reason why we have limited penetration with handgun bullets was something that was developed for liability purposes in the military. I should say in police work. I was in the police training field when this stuff was being discussed, and while it was going around in the industry through the research and development teams and the different companies, Winchester and Remington and Federal and that sort of thing, and it was being discussed by the FBI. The big huge volume of literature that came out about FBI testing and everything. It was a liability issue. Bullets to pass through strike little girls on the other side. Bullets to pass through, strike an innocent bystander on the other side. You can't fire in a congested situation when you have bullet pass through because of that liability factor of harming an innocent bystander. So it was essential to have a bullet that expanded as greatly as possible to affect as much damage on the way in. And to basically cause as much lung tissue damage as possible and whatever in the upper thorax to stop the person, but without having the bullet penetrate all the way through and come out the other side. Any one of your great game hunters through the years, Jack O'Connor and all those, Warren Page, they all used calibers and bullets that went straight on through. They wanted to have that bullet come out the other side and leave a big massive blood trail so that they could follow the animal wherever it went. I have shot animals and have seen where the bullet entrance wound dripped one drop of blood and landed there on the leaf. And if the bullet didn't pass through, there's no other bleeding. All the other bleeding is internal. If you want to have a blood trail to follow, then you have to have a bullet pass through. And if you really want to have upset lung tissue, especially with a handgun that doesn't disrupt a lot of tissue, you got to have that bullet pass through, and you want to have as much wound cavity as you can. So always select the longest and heaviest bullets that are available for that particular cartridge. That's absolutely vital. Don't listen to you don't want to have lightweight, high velocity bullets. You want to have heavy, deep penetrating bullets. And that's where sometimes looking at the velocity figures and the energy figures can sometimes delude you. There's not enough velocity, no matter what it is, in a handgun bullet to cause any great amount of destruction. You're still only talking about 1,500 feet per second. So it's not an awful lot of velocity. What you need to have is somewhat more modest velocity, but very deep penetration, and if possible, something that's sufficient to get out the other side. The classic deer cartridges for handguns are, the .357 has been used for a great number of years. The .357 has been around since the 30s, and it has always done a pretty good job on deer. It should be respected. It's neither high velocity nor high energy when it is compared to, say, even the lowly .30-30, but it's sufficient to drive through the chest cavity of a deer within 50 yards reasonably. And as long as you're a competent shot and you can get your bullet in from 50 yards, you should have a dead deer pretty soon. Bullet diameter is always preferable. Therefore, I would go up, if I can, I would go to a 41 Magnum. 41 Magnum not only increases the bullet weight, but it increases the diameter. All things are relative. All things are fairly relative. You know, as you go from, it's like comparing the 243 to the 6.5s and the 270 and the 7mm. They all seem to put down the same size game, and they all seem to put it down with the same efficiency. And the efficiency factor is the sectional density of the bullet, the length of the bullet. Now, greater bullet diameter is important with a rifle. But it's significantly more important with a handgun, as I say. I'll keep repeating that. It's very important to have as much tissue destruction as you can, because it has to, your tissue destruction is basically limited to the immediate surrounding area. I don't care what ballistic gelatin shows and all that other stuff. That's a temporary wound cavity that really doesn't have much effect on a deer. And you're dealing with gelatin. You know, lungs are not gelatin. Everything is different here. You want to have a lot of tissue destruction, which is caused by bullet penetration and cutting tissue with that bullet. So you want to have as big a bullet diameter as you can within reason. It's got to be something that you can handle, because as I've said many times, you can't kill a game animal by showing him your head stamp. He couldn't care less if it says 50 caliber if you don't hit him with it. So it is preferable if you can go from a 357 to a 41 Magnum. 41 Magnum is, without having an awful lot more recoil, it's got some more recoil than a 357 Magnum. But in my experience, most people can handle a 41 Magnum pretty nicely, and it's a very flat shooting round. It's got extremely good sectional density. That a 210 or a 220 grain bullet has got comparable sectional density to a 158 grain 357 bullet, but a little bit bigger diameter. It's a true 41 caliber versus a 357 diameter, so it's a significantly larger bullet, and it's known to have good penetration and good takedown power on deer. Why it's not more popular is beyond me. It came out in the mid '60s. I was a great fan of it when it first came out. My dad went out and got a Blackhawk Ruger, and he shot his extensively. It was a fabulous gun to shoot. Modest recoil, and it was very nicely made gun that handled well, very accurate. High recommendation is the 41 Magnum. Up the list is the classic of all, the 44 Magnum. 44 Magnum is just everything about it is just that much more, it's more competent on deer, because it does, again, it's the same sectional density, all things being equal, to the 41 and to the 357 with comparable, bullets of comparable length, but it has the advantage of, again, greater bore diameter. Now, the difference between the 41 and the 44 is not as great as the difference between the 357 and the 41. The 357 goes up to 41 caliber. 41 caliber goes up to 427 or 430. So this is really not a true 44. It's going up a smaller increment. But the actual striking area of the bullet is significant. Recoil is also significant for a person who's not a veteran shooter. Nobody should be buying a 44 Magnum to be their first handgun to take a field. You really need to hone your skills with a lighter, and this is true with all handguns. You need to work up the scale and develop your skills and become a very competent shot before you start taking on. This is basically a flinching machine. For anybody who's never shot a handgun before, this is not the way to begin, because you'll end up with a devastating flinch and you'll never be able to hit your target. Always better to be able to hit a target with a controlled shot than to miss them with the biggest caliber in the world. But this is the kind of barrel length you'd be looking at for a handgun to go hunting. Maintain that velocity, keep that velocity up. Truncating the barrel length is a popular thing these days for a survival gun, basically, for something that you need to carry around with you as a backup gun in dangerous countryside where there are bears roaming and things like that. That's a good backup gun, but it's not the gun that you want to take afield for the express purpose of hunting large game. You really need to have as much velocity as you can eke out, and you're definitely going to be getting more velocity with a full-length handgun barrel. Now, about the skill levels, the skill set that's involved with hunting big game. It's asked of me frequently, what's the farthest that you can shoot large game with a handgun? Well, with the standard large game handgun calibers, and I'm talking about up to the .44 Magnum, we're talking about ranges. Let me just get out the figures here so you can see what we're dealing with. Your velocity with a 240 grain .44 Magnum at 100 yards has dropped off to 1133. Now remember, I said that I really like to see velocities up over 1200 feet per second. That stops at 50 yards. When you get out to those extended ranges of 100 yards, now you're dealing with velocities of more like a 44 special or a 38 special. You no longer now you're dealing with velocities that are much lower. 1100 feet per second or 1000 feet per second is not 1400 feet per second. So you've lost some of that driving velocity to get the bullet all the way through the target and get it home and to penetrate your game. But again, the more important question is, how far can you reasonably handle your handgun? The first thing I want you to do is watch my handgun instruction series. The handgun instruction series will teach you how to do that. Then, you have the practical skill set developed where you can keep your shots in a small group, and you want to be able to always strike that small group. Now, it's essential to understand that a deer's kill zone is approximately the size of a gallon milk jug. A gallon milk jug that's the target area. But we're not talking about just clipping the milk jug. We're not just talking about clipping a lobe of a lung. We're talking about, a massive strike on that lung tissue. So you really don't have the size of a milk jug to work with here. It's not like hitting a milk jug where all the water in the jug, basically bursts the entire jug because you hit the side of it. It doesn't happen that way with lungs. You've got to be able to hit them solidly so that you can really tear a hole through them. So what you're really talking about is half-gallon milk bottles. Get some half-gallon milk bottles, cardboard milk containers, save them up, and take them out, if you want, spray paint them brown or something so you can pretend they're woodchucks, and put them out, at different distances, and practice shooting after you've developed your marksmanship. Now, I don't like shooting reactive targets as a means of establishing marksmanship, because you can't tell whether you're hitting left, right, up, or down. You can't tell what your group size is, and you'll never improve by just simply shooting reactive targets, as I said in my handgun instruction videos. You really need to develop good marksmanship where you can basically, you're looking to, how good? Well, your goal is to be able to strike, light matches at 50 yards, okay, with a handgun. And then when you get to that point, you're good. Everything below that is, you just keep on working. So always try to shoot small, miss small, like the movie said. Always try to develop your skill set so that you can shoot through an eye of a needle. Being able to hit half-gallon milk jugs at 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards. I would say that most people in field conditions with open sights, they're doing very well if they can strike half-gallon milk jugs at 25 yards consistently and reliably. Now, if your skill set is better than that, and if you're able to dump milk jugs constantly, half-gallon milk jugs constantly at 35, 45, 50 yards, fine. But, prudence is always the name of the game when it comes to handguns. Don't be shooting at a deer just because he's standing out there with a handgun and expect him to come laying down on you because you hit them with your .44 Magnum or your .454 Casull, because you're probably not going to be able to strike them with a deadly shot. You're not going to be able to put the bullet where it needs to go. So it's a very essential thing to regard your handgun with a great degree of prudence and respect, and to understand that it has limitations in its ballistic capability, and that you have reasonable expectations of success at certain ranges. Now, what sort of sights to use on a handgun? I guess the ideal thing to use would be, the ideal thing to use for most people would be a scope with low power. You know, you want to have as much field of view as you possibly can, and you want to have the biggest exit pupil as you can, so that you can find your game in a hurry. 1 to 1.5 powers is high. I would never go higher than that for a handgun scope. You really want to have just for big game. You really want to have a low power handgun scope that just basically gives you a solid sighting plane. In other words, the scope flattens your image so that you don't have 3 distinct sighting planes. You don't have a rear sight and a front sight and a target. You have just one focal plane. The deer and the crosshairs are in the same visual focal plane, and that's what the advantage is with a scope more than anything else. It's not the magnification factor. Anybody who can't see their deer standing there at 50 yards should really not be taking a gun anywhere. You should be able to see your deer very clearly at 50 yards and understand that it's a deer and not somebody else. So be very, very cautious and prudent in all things. Open sights are fine. I personally prefer open sights for myself, but I've been an open sight shooter all my life. I'm a professional grade shooter. I'm a NRA Distinguished Expert. You know, I can shoot baseballs with this at 50 yards. So this is fine for me. But this is not the ideal thing for the average person. I recognize that, but you want to be able to strike reliably and consistently at all times with whatever gun you're using, whether it's a rifle or handgun. But the need becomes greatly intensified with a handgun, which doesn't deliver exploding velocity. And don't be deluded by what a bullet does, on water jugs and on gelatin and things like that. The very simple fact of the matter is that those are hydraulic forces that are going off that are different than what occurs on a game animal when a bullet is striking tissue. So if I can boil it down to a simple concept, is long, heavy bullets essential. Don't be using the high velocity bullets just because they have superior velocity. They're designed to have limited penetration. 180 grain 44 Magnum bullet is designed to have very limited penetration. It expands quickly and it won't go out the other side of a deer. That's not the bullet you want to use. You want to use standard 240 to 300 grain bullets with a handgun to get deep into the tissue. With a 357 Magnum, the same thing. You want to use 158 grain or heavier bullets. 41 Magnum. I prefer the 210 to 220 grain bullets to get them in deeply as possible. Keep your ranges within reason, and don't try to strike at extreme range because you just simply don't have enough velocity to get enough penetration. That's not true naturally if you're using a rifle with those cartridges. That boosts the velocity significantly, and those cartridges can get out another 25 or 30 yards or more, out to 75 to 100 yards without any difficulty. But they're not heavy hitting calibers. What about the intermediate calibers such as the 45 Long Colt or the 44 Special? They're all right within very, very close range, within 25 or 30 yards, using the very heaviest bullets and making sure that you have good bullet construction and that you're able to genuinely hit your target where you need to. They do have the capacity to put in a good size hole, and they can affect a decent hit. But with your typical 44 special loads, you're only dealing with 950 to 1,000 feet per second. It's very, very, very marginal. We're talking about just, 10 or 15 yard woodland shots, and that's as far out as I would want to go with that gun. 45 Colt, the same sort of at the same velocities. It's the same issue. You're putting a big hole in there, but you're still not dealing with a deep penetrating bullet. So again, those are marginal calibers when it comes to deer. And if you're souping them up, that's another thing. Then you're magnumizing them. But again, I'm talking about factory velocities. Okay, I think I've pretty well covered all the bases when it comes to handgun hunting. I'm glad you're watching. Please continue to watch and subscribe to my videos. God bless.